Welcome to The Explainer. We are getting right into it today with a look at cracking the Pacific sniper problem and how a system ultimately beat the artisan. I am so excited to take you through this incredible piece of history. So let's immediately set the scene. Imagine, it's December 26, 1943. You're a young Marine wading through literally chest-deep swamp water at Cape Gloucester in New Britain. The humidity is completely suffocating, and the jungle around you is so incredibly dense that you can barely see 50 feet in any direction. Every single step is a struggle, and the tension is just absolutely palpable.
A marine historian later described the conditions under that towering 150-foot jungle canopy as being like a perpetual twilight even at noon. And then, right in that dim, vine-choked darkness, somewhere up ahead, a single rifle crack rings out. The guy right next to you drops. But here is the absolute terror of the situation. There's no muzzle flash. There's no shape to charge at. There's no second shot to give away the enemy's position. The shooter could be 10 yards away, or they could be 200 yards away. And worst of all, you know that unseen Japanese sniper didn't just fire at random. No, they specifically picked off your platoon's officer or your radio operator.
Okay, let's actually dive into this technological mystery. How on earth was this rifle virtually invisible? Well, the Japanese were using the Type 97 Arisaka rifle. Now, on paper, to Western military analysts, it really wasn't all that impressive. But it had a terrifying secret weapon, and that was the Genzo, or reduced cartridge. Basically, this specialized 6.5mm round was specifically reformulated with a reduced powder charge. So when you paired that with the long barrel of the Type 97, it produced almost zero smoke and absolutely no muzzle flash. The act of sniping had been engineered to be completely untraceable.
What's really fascinating here is how completely opposite the tactical thinking was between the two sides. While the Western sniper doctrine was all about operating from the front lines and going for the longest possible shot, the Japanese doctrine flipped this entirely on its head. They had these hand-picked marksmen hiding in perfectly camouflaged spider holes that they called takotubo, or octopus pots. And they wouldn't just shoot the first guy they saw. Instead, they'd sit there, let an entire American patrol walk right past them, completely unbothered, and then they'd open fire from behind, specifically targeting the leaders in the back. Every single takotubo was essentially a suicide post, designed purely to inflict maximum leadership casualties before the sniper was eventually discovered.
3 seconds. That is literally all the time it took. In just 3 seconds, a single shot from an invisible rifle could completely collapse the entire leadership structure of an American platoon. If you were a commander, a radio operator, or an artillery spotter, you were a massive target. I mean, you couldn't even stand up to stretch your legs without risking your life.
And the truly terrifying truth was that the United States military was just utterly unprepared for this. Think about this. In the spring of 1942, the U.S. Army didn't even have an official sniper school. And the standard-issue American marksman rifles, they failed miserably in these conditions. The M1903A4 had this Weaver scope that would just instantly fog up in the humid jungle and lose its zero. And the Marine alternative, the M1903A1, came with this massive 8-power inertial scope, which made the whole thing way too long and incredibly awkward for close-quarters combat in dense brush. American soldiers were basically learning by dying. Because they didn't have a proper counter-sniper doctrine yet, the early attempts to use snipers led to some really tragic misuses of elite troops. Take the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943, for example. First Lieutenant William Hawkins led his scout sniper platoon not on some stealthy reconnaissance mission like you'd expect, but directly into a point-blank assault on heavily fortified Japanese pillboxes just to clear a pier. Hawkins fought heroically, destroying multiple positions at point-blank range before he was mortally wounded. His sacrifice was absolutely legendary, but it proved a really glaring point. True snipers were being misused as basic assault troops simply because the Marine Corps was still trying to figure out what a scout sniper platoon was actually supposed to do.
But a major shift was starting to happen. Back in the States, over at Camp Lejeune, Captain Walter Walsh was building something completely revolutionary. He realized that American Marines were never going to outweight a Japanese sniper who had literally trained his entire life to sit perfectly still for days. So, instead of sending out a solitary marksman, Walsh built a two-man system. First, you have the shooter, whose pure absolute focus is just taking the shot. And second, you have the spotter. The spotter scans the jungle canopy, checks the wind, and defends the team if they ever get compromised. Two pairs of eyes, working in absolute silence, could totally outmatch the solitary Japanese sniper who could only look in one direction at a time.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the Marines transformed counter-sniping from a lone wolf job into a full-on squad-level machine. They did this by integrating heavy weapons into a combined arms system. If they even suspected a sniper was around, they didn't just send one guy with a rifle to go find him. No way.
They raked the treetops with 37mm canister rounds. They peppered suspected hides with 20-round magazines from Browning automatic rifles. And for those deep spider holes, they brought right up the M2 flamethrower. Though it's absolutely vital to point out that carrying that flamethrower made you a massive target. Those specific operators had a terrifying battlefield life expectancy of just 4 minutes.
Moving into 1944, the Marines weren't just reacting anymore. They were taking the fight directly behind enemy lines. Which brings us to First Lieutenant Frank Tukovsky and his highly, let's say, unconventional recruiting criteria over on Saipan. He operated with a very simple rule. When 2 Marines got into a fight, the loser ended up in the infirmary and the winner ended up in the brig. He specifically wanted the aggressive, rough-and-tumble Marines who could handle themselves in the absolute most brutal close-quarter situations you could possibly imagine.
These men famously became known as the 40 Thieves, and they were effectively out there hunting the hunters. Operating deep behind Japanese lines for days at a time, they relied on rigorous hand-to-hand combat and absolute dead silence to survive. We're talking throwing Molotov cocktails at enemy tanks. In one wild instance on Taipopolei Ridge, they used their scoped rifles to systematically shoot Japanese troops right off their bicycles, completely wrecking the enemy's mobility. The feared Japanese sniper was suddenly the one being stalked.
But just as the Marines finally mastered fighting in the jungle, the battlefield completely changed. Which brings us to a really crucial question. What happens to this meticulously crafted counter-sniper system when the jungle trees just disappear? As we move into the brutal climax of the Pacific War in 1945, the rules of the entire game are about to be rewritten in volcanic ash. That brings us to a staggering number, 21,000. Under the command of General Kiribayashi, 21,000 Japanese troops were waiting for the Marines on the black sands of Iwo Jima. But they weren't hiding up in trees anymore. They were deeply entrenched inside 11 miles of reinforced concrete tunnels and cave networks. The sniper threat had evolved from a lone shooter hidden in palm fronds to a highly protected marksman firing out of a concrete slit in the side of a mountain.
To crack this final, extreme version of the sniper problem, the Marines had to bring in the ultimate heavy hitter, the M4A3R3 Sherman tank, better known by its nickname, the Zippo. When scout sniper teams identified a cave mouth, bazooka teams would fire directly into the position. But it was the Zippo tank pumping sustained fire into those crevices that actually forced the cave-dwelling snipers out into the open. And the very moment they ran, they stepped directly into the crosshairs of the waiting Marine scout snipers.
Let's move to and see how this builds across the entire timeline of the war. Cracking the Pacific sniper problem wasn't just some sudden eureka moment. It was a bloody 3-year evolution of constant trial and error. From the early painful failures on Guadalcanal back in 1942, to the misuse of snipers like Hawkins in 43, to the aggressive behind-the-lines hunting of the 40 Thieves in 44, and finally, the mechanized clearing of Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 45. The Marines learned the hard way, paying for every single tactical adjustment in blood.
But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. The Marines didn't beat the Japanese snipers by simply outshooting them man-to-man. They realized pretty early on that they couldn't. The Japanese sniper was an artisan, a solitary, incredibly patient master of concealment who relied entirely on individual skill. The American solution was to build a system. They created an integrated, team-based, combined arms machine that didn't rely on one single guy being perfect, but on an entire unit working together flawlessly. In the end, the system beat the artisan.
War is mathematics. War is teamwork. This incredible doctrine, forged in the steaming jungles and volcanic islands of the Pacific, it didn't just end in 1945. Modern sniper systems used later in Korea, in Vietnam, and right up to today were built directly upon the foundation laid by these often forgotten Marines. Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to ponder. When you're faced with an enemy whose individual skills vastly outmatch your own, is the truest path to victory always found in fighting harder? Or is it actually found in changing the rules of the game entirely? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we will see you next time.